Hello and welcome to the Charlotte Museum of History's weekly Lunch and Learn. We're so glad to have you with us today and appreciate you sharing your time with us. This morning, hello and welcome to the Charlotte Museum of History's weekly lunch.
Technology's wonderful, isn't it?
I was going to say, I wasn't sure when I was supposed to start. It's not quite 12.
Apologies, Janet.
That's okay.
I had to get us live on YouTube. So I'm going to leave this intro slide playing for just a couple more minutes.
Okay.
And then I will jump back in and we can do the intros again. Thank you all for being patient.
Do I just start right at 12?
I'll get you started. So just wait for my cue.
Oh, even better. Thank you.
You're welcome. Alrighty, thank you all for being patient with me as we figured out our technology. We are going to go ahead and get started with the program today. We're really excited to have Lauren Wallace with us. She is one of the education specialists at the museum, and she's going to be talking with Janet Wade, who is one of our most favorite people in the world. So they're going to be talking about spies and the struggle for independence and how spies and all kinds of different people helped in that struggle for independence. So this program is 100% free today, but we are in the middle of a fundraising campaign. We have been raising funds for a matching grant, thanks to the Weatherspoon Family Foundation. They challenged us to raise $75,000, and they would match that amount. We extended the campaign until July 7th, and we have raised about $55,000. So we've got $20,000 to raise in the next few days. So if you are able to support us, if you have joined these programs before and have enjoyed learning about Charlotte history and U.S. history, we hope that you'll support us. You saw the website on that screen that we just had up, but it's super easy. It's charlottemuseum.org/donate. And so if you are able to go and donate, we appreciate your support. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren and Janet for the program today.
Thank you, Angel. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Lauren, this has got to be one of the most interesting aspects of the American Revolution, because who doesn't love spies and espionage? Tell us a little bit about these spies. Who were they and what did they do?
Absolutely. So the thing about spies is a lot of times it depends on exactly which side you're on, how you feel about them, what you think about them, what you remember about them. And it also kind of depends on what you're coming to the table with, what you're thinking about, what you know. So I'm actually going to share a little bit of my screen right here so that you guys can kind of see. So what is a spy? If you grew up during the Cold War, this is your spy. This is a famous cartoon, Spy versus Spy. If you are a Bond fan like me, I'm sorry, this is what you think of when you think of a spy. But in reality, spies are not necessarily kind of that dashing figure. They're really going to be more in the background. So when you look at this painting right here, this is actually comforting General Green after a loss. But the woman behind here, she's the most likely to be a spy in this case. She's not dressed in uniform. She's not drawing attention to herself. She is bringing things to the table. She is walking around this space, this tavern that she owns. She's the most likely candidate as a spy. And in this painting here, this is a very famous image of one of the most well-known African-American spies. This is actually James Amistad. And he is holding the horse right next to this officer here. He's the spy. And so what we see when it comes to these spies is we see people that are behind the scenes. We see people that are generally left out of the story of the American Revolution. And I think that's why it's so important to talk about them. It's an opportunity for everyone to be a part of this cause in the sort of struggle for freedom.
So were there different types of spies? Did they have different jobs, responsibilities? What were some of the things that they were able to do?
So we actually have a number of different kinds of spies. And again, it's going to depend, your kind of understanding of who they are and your emotional response to who they are is going to depend on which side of the American Revolution you're on. But we have a couple of different ways that people are going to become spies, a couple of different reasons that they want to engage in espionage, and a couple of different ways that they're going to kind of maneuver through this. And so what you're looking at here is the different kinds of spies, sort of a basic overview. We have double agents. Those are people who on the surface might be working for one side, but are actually kind of playing both sides of the field, supplying people with wrong information. When you're a spy, it's not called lying, it is called disinformation. I recommend you do not try that with anyone. It will not work well for you. But we have double agents, people that are playing both sides. We have people that are ideologically motivated. These are people that decide that they want to join the cause because of what that cause represents. So we have a number of people that sign up to kind of engage in espionage because they are motivated by this idea of liberty, this idea of freedom, the things that the American Revolution is promising them. That, or if they are spies for the British, they are on the side of staying loyal. They don't support this break from the mother country. They want to stay loyal to the king. And so they're going to sign up in order to make sure that America stays a part of the British Empire. You, of course, have people that are monetarily motivated. There are people on both sides that are actually paying people to become spies. They are supplying them with stipends. They are offering them money. One of the most famous monetarily motivated spies is actually Benedict Arnold. So Benedict Arnold is known on this side of the pond as the biggest traitor in American history, but he is actually a spy. He's a double agent and he is monetarily motivated. Apparently his wife had some expensive tastes. So he signed up basically to turn over West Point for a big sum of money. Then we also have blackmail motivated. These are people that sign up to become spies not by choice, but because someone has some sort of information on them. We hear a lot about this in the Cold War. We see this with a lot of people undergoing background checks before they're put in sensitive positions. Blackmail motivated is definitely something that both sides are worried about, but both sides are very eager to exploit.
So you mentioned Benedict Arnold, obviously the most famous of the traitors and spies in the American Revolution. Do we know the names of some of these other spies who served as well, or are they just anonymous to us?
So we know some of the names and then we don't know some of the names. The thing about being a spy is that it was a very secretive profession. You didn't want people to know you were a spy because you were worried about what the ramifications were of being not only for you, but also being caught for your family members. So we know about a number of different spy rings. We know about a number of different people. We know about them a lot because of their pension records. People after the American Revolution on both sides trying to get the pensions, the money that is promised to people who fought during the war. So they start to explain what they did. So we start to see some of these names. But one of the most famous spy rings is actually the Culper spy ring. And George Washington himself did not actually know the identities of the people that were involved in that ring. We know now, years later, because there was a lot of detective work behind the scenes. Sometimes in their lifetime, the name came out, but for some of them, we didn't know until the early 20th century. So we definitely know some of the names, but it does depend on exactly how secretive that individual wanted to be. And so this right here is actually Nathan Hale. Nathan Hale is one of the most famous first spies of the American Revolution, and he is actually caught. And there's a little bit of a debate among the historical community whether or not he was caught because he was a bad spy or he just got unlucky. Apparently, there are some accounts that he was basically running around telling people he was a spy, and the British, of course, grabbed him. So unfortunately, he is executed. He's one of the first spies executed of the American Revolution. And he famously said, "My only regret is that I have but one life to give for my country."
Okay, so you mentioned the Culper ring. I'm watching Turn on Netflix right now, and they're talking about this Culper ring. So obviously there is some documentation about these folks. And a lot of them were ordinary people. So how do you get to be a spy? Who is a spy? How do they, what special qualifications might they have to become a spy?
So the Culper spy ring that is featured in Turn is actually one of the most famous of the spy rings. And it's one of the most famous of the spy rings because they are just so incredibly successful. They are operating out of New York, and there are a series of individuals who are connected by one individual. His name is Benjamin Talmadge, and he basically gathers together a bunch of people that he happens to know and a bunch of people he happens to trust. And these people that he happens to know and happens to trust come from a wide variety of backgrounds and actually represent a wide variety of professions. And there's even a woman who is incredibly successful as part of this spy ring. So the thing about who gets to be a spy is the answer is anyone. And that's both an incredibly great thing for people that are trying to recruit spies and an incredibly frustrating thing for the people trying to catch them. Because at the end of the day, absolutely everyone can be a spy. And especially with the American Revolution, what we see is we see these moments when people who are traditionally marginalized, people who are traditionally left out of the narrative, left out of the ability to fight, left out of the ability to feel like they have an impact on the world, are invited into the fold, are able to be a part of this cause. We see this especially with women. Women in particular are not allowed to be a part of what we refer to as the public sphere. And that's a very fancy historian way of saying active in the spotlight. People who are out there talking, engaging, making a difference in their community in a very, very visible way. But one of the things that we know about women, especially during this time, is that they are really starting to assert their independence. They are really inspired by the dialogue that's coming out of this sort of discussion about independence. And they start to ask themselves, well, what about me? How do I get involved? And even though they are, when we see the Declaration of Independence, it says that all men are created equal. We know that this is a moment when women start going, we're going to support this cause because we want to be able to say that, no, we are equal too. We have these rights. And so they're willing to sign up in order to do things for the American Revolution in order to feel like they get to gain control of that same freedom, that same liberty. So we see a lot of women that are going to become a part of the American Revolution. We're also going to see a lot of African Americans, people who are going to sign up on both sides of it because they're excited about the possibility of feeling like they have control. Another fancy historian word is the word agency. But what agency means is that you have control over your own destiny. And people who are held in bondage have felt for hundreds of years at this point that they don't have control. And the American Revolution offers this moment. So they're quick to sign up too. We also see children being recruited to the cause. Children are moving around, they're running about. Even in the 18th century, they're still children. And they make very, very secretive little messengers that can run between the different camps because people expect them to be out, expect them to be around, and they're not going to suspect a child.
So when I think about the word espionage, I get all these pictures in my head of cloak and dagger, secretive operations, sneaking around, as well as those who are the double agents who really have to play two roles. Was this true during the American Revolution, or is this more a distinctly modern impression of what spying is like?
So there is a long history of espionage, cloak and dagger, all of these different things. Of course, it's popularized with the kind of Cold War spy dramas where we see James Bond, where we see spy versus spy, a lot of the comic books that are coming out in response to the Cold War. But this is a phenomenon that has existed for thousands of years. Pretty much since people started forming governments, started going to war, there have been spies. Because information remains one of the most important things in executing any war. Information really is power. And people figure out very, very quickly that having control of information is going to help them win the war. And so we see all throughout the American Revolution a lot of moments where people are pushing this kind of either false narrative or true narrative, are going and doing all of these different things. So for instance, back in 1776, in the lead up to the American Revolution, we have these committees of secret correspondence. Now, the Committee of Correspondence is basically referring to any sort of government body that's actively governing these different areas. So we know that Hezekiah himself is on the Committee of Safety here in Mecklenburg County. This is a very public thing. People know who these members are. But the committees of secret correspondence are established in order to begin kind of laying the groundwork for a spy network, begin to figure out what's going on in the world and start to figure out how they're going to use that. And people do not know who are on these committees. The other thing we have is in 1776, we have some diplomats that start traveling. And some of the most famous of these diplomats actually go to France. We know now in 2020 that France ends up joining the side of the Americans and that they are instrumental in winning this war. But in 1776, France did not want to join up with America right away. They were a little concerned that America was not going to be able to fight this war, that they were not going to be successful, and that France was going to be on the hook for fighting England. Now, there's a lot of kind of resentment that's been brewing between England and France over the past, well, honestly, since the two countries were formed. But France does not want to end up having to fight a war that's not really their war to fight. They want America to prove they can do something. But they're definitely open to the possibility of helping a little bit behind the scenes. So Benjamin Franklin, Arthur Lee, and Silas Deane get on a boat and they head over to France. And once they arrive, they realize that the French government is absolutely excited to help them in any way they can. It has less to do with wanting to support the causes of American independence from the government side of things than it does to kind of undermine British shipping. France is still a little annoyed that they lost some of their colonies. And so the famous playwright Beaumarchais, who actually writes The Marriage of Figaro, he is going to be instrumental in making sure that the United States gets all of these arms, all of these munitions, and information. And he's secretly passing these things along through Silas Deane. And at the same time, Benjamin Franklin is kind of basically exploring France, living in the capital city, working at the, going to the court of Versailles. And this is a family-friendly program, so I'm just going to say Benjamin Franklin was a little popular with the ladies. And the ladies of France are the ones that are hosting these intellectual salons. And in these intellectual salons, they are inviting all of these people that are in France that have power, that have influence, that have information, that want to sit and talk about the ideals of the day. And Benjamin Franklin is really good at exploiting his position as popular with the ladies, but also as this novelty in France. Benjamin Franklin is a very well-educated man. He is very well dressed. Well, in France, he decides that he's going to wear a coonskin cap because that's what France expects of America. So he's playing up these stereotypes. He's getting invited to all of these things. And then he's proceeding to publish this information in a lot of different newspapers under a false name. He's basically going behind the scenes and encouraging people to join the American cause without saying it's him. And he's passing this information along to the people in America, letting them know what's going on. So he is able to kind of operate behind the scenes. He's a diplomat, but he is, at the end of the day, also trading in information, as are his compatriots that are over there from America. So we see a lot of that kind of cloak and dagger things happening there. Newspapers prove to be a very valuable source of information and a source of propaganda. People in the 18th century expect their newspapers to basically report opinion, not necessarily fact. So the headlines, you could tell immediately which side the newspapers were on. Of course, we do still see this today. But in the 18th century, there is absolutely no attempt to hide it. You know who the newspaper is supporting, and these newspapers will deliberately publish information in order to sway public opinion, in order to put forth information that is not true in an effort to confuse the British. We see this sometimes in New York after it's captured. And we see a lot of journalists that are using their position as journalists in order to move between different spaces. People expect them to travel, expect them to receive correspondence, and so they're able to pass this information. So we definitely see a lot of cloak and dagger. It's not necessarily going to be computer generated because we do not have computers in the 18th century, but those same sorts of things are happening.
So all this information that they're gathering is really great. And the newspapers are an interesting way to share it, a way that we don't think about today. But that can't really be the only way you pass along information, just because of time sensitivity and getting it out in the newspapers. So what were some of the other methods that spies used to transmit information from one group to another?
We have a number of different things that people are going to use. Some of them are more high tech than others. When we think of technology, we do think of the computer in the palm of our hand, but technology has existed for thousands of years. Technology is just something that makes your life easier. And the spies are really on the kind of forefront of a lot of this technology. And so we've got a number of different tools of the trade. The first is going to be the Cypher. And the Cypher is essentially a wooden kind of code book. And it's a way of changing the text that you're putting there without making it obvious that you're changing the text. Or it's a way of making it so that if someone receives this letter, unless they have the code, unless they have how they're supposed to line up the cipher, they are not able to read this message. So each one of these rings on the cipher that you see here is going to twist. This particular one is the Jefferson cipher, so Thomas Jefferson. And what you do is you would actually line up the different letters, and you would have a certain key that would tell you which letters to line up, which one of those rings are going to tell you what the letters are. So this right here is one method that they're going to use. We also have everyone's favorite invisible ink. And invisible ink is a really subtle way of doing things, and there's a lot of different variations that people can use, and that's why it proves extremely popular during the American Revolution. So of course, if you've done anything in, say, a third grade classroom, you might have tried using lemon juice and heat. That is definitely something that you can do in order to make sure that the letters are going to be revealed. But by the 18th century and the end of the 18th century, this has become a lot more technologically advanced. We have the advent of some modern chemistry. And so you have people that are actually able to create specific types of ink and specific types of what are called reagents in order to make it so that only certain people would be able to reveal it. The thing about lemon juice or some of these other acids, I'm going to be really disgusting here, urine is one of them. You can actually, anyone would be able to use heat or use some of these chemical reactions in order to make those appear. Whereas if you have a specific type of ink, you would have to have the specific type of reagent in order to use this. And what you're looking at in this picture right here is someone has written a letter, but they've spaced the letter apart. And on the lines in between, they've written in invisible ink. And what you're seeing is someone going over the top of it with a reagent, which is causing the intended letter to be revealed. Now, George Washington was a huge proponent of invisible ink. He thought that was a really great way of getting around things and made it very difficult for people, even if they'd intercepted letters, to be able to know what that letter said. The only thing is George Washington was a little worried for a bit that perhaps the British were using the same reagent he was, because that's definitely something you have to worry about. Is the person you bought this invisible ink from and this agent from, are they actually a double agent? Are they selling to both sides? Do you have the same kind of keys and ciphers? So invisible ink is definitely something people are going to use, but it's not going to be the only thing. There's a couple of other tricks that people are going to have up their sleeves.
That reminds me of National Treasure, when they find the invisible message on the back of the Declaration of Independence using lemon juice and in a modern day blow dryers. So some things, I guess, really didn't change all that much. We have some questions from our participants today. Let me get to a couple of those. How do we find out the information on these particular spy rings in the 20th century? So what are some of our tools that we're using now to help us uncover more of this spy history?
So one of the best things that we have is actually modern technology, and that really is the digitization of a lot of the correspondence and a lot of these letters and a lot of this information. Before, some of these things would be in family papers, they would maybe be in small archives somewhere. But in the 21st century, one of the things that all of these libraries, all of these archives are doing is actually digitizing, making these things available online. And so we're seeing a lot more of this information out there. We're also seeing a lot more sort of sharing of information between people, between researchers. The ability to communicate a little bit faster and a little bit easier, and ability to access more information is making it so we're getting more information out of this. The other thing that we see is, especially, I know I've mentioned this a couple of times, but the Culper spy ring really is the most kind of well-known because it was so incredibly successful. And the papers associated with this Culper spy ring, some of them survive. And so we are actually able to see a lot of their correspondence, and we're able to see a lot of the things that they did. There are stories that are written, there are families kind of oral histories that were taken down in the 19th century. So we're able to see what's going on there, and we're able to get more information about what people were doing.
Do we have any way of knowing how important some of this information was? Is there any indication that a particular piece of information that was shared played a major role, like in a victory or in some sort of important setting within the revolution?
Absolutely. So especially with Yorktown, spies played a major role in making sure that Yorktown was successful. They were able to know where the British were able to understand troop movements. There's also some smaller stories of success. So here in the Carolina backcountry, there is a woman named Kate Morberry. She actually lived near the Cowpens area. And that is kind of right down in the South Carolina region and right near where we are here. And she happens to live right near a British encampment. And she decides that she is going to alert the Patriots to what's going on. And so what she does is she actually has a number of sick friends that she needs to go visit. And she usually has to go visit them right after something important happens at the British encampment. And so she is going to travel about, she's going to share that information. And so a lot of people are aware of what's happening, aware in this area of where the British are going, what the British are doing. They're hearing stories, they know kind of the number of troops, and that is going to make a huge difference in the preparedness of people in this region, what they're expecting. It lets them know that the British are coming. It gives them time to hide valuables, to hide information, to make sure that they've got reinforcements. So we have a number of people like that, just all spread throughout these 13 colonies that are sharing that information.
We had a question about children as spies. Do we have any idea who the youngest child spy was, or in what ways were children utilized as spies?
So I'm not aware of who the youngest spy is, but we definitely have a number of children that are going to be recruited to this cause. And they're usually going to be recruited because their parents are spies as well. So we know that there are especially women responsible for making sure that information gets from one spy to the other. Women make a very good middleman because they are actively engaged in things around the home, in the community, and are expected to be acting as hostesses or expected to be basically out in this community shopping or something like that. They're running the home. So what we have, especially in the way that children are recruited to this cause, is that they will be the one carrying said message from, so the message gets to the woman gives it to a child who then is going to carry it along. We have accounts of women sewing buttons that have secret compartments in them. So you have a cloth button, and you can buy buttons in the 18th century, but most people are actually going to have to make their own in some manner, shape, or form. And cloth buttons are definitely something that people have. So what you would do is you would actually take a button, you would make it so that it was a little bit bigger, and it would allow for a message to be stuffed inside that button. That button is then going to be sewn onto the child's garment. The child is going to go walk to wherever this next spy is, and the spy is actually going to take the button, and the child is going to go home. You also might have children that are carrying things in baskets, maybe are delivering things to neighbors, basically running errands, essentially, but you're going to have those messages that are hidden away in different things, whether that's the hem of a garment, whether that's a basket they're carrying. There's even some accounts of letters being buried underneath food and things like that. So children are definitely going to be an important part of this story.
So other than giving the message like to a child to deliver, if I'm a woman in a community and I come across a piece of information that I think is important and I want to share it, and I've got a contact, I know there's somebody out there that I can pass this information along to, how do I let them know that I have acquired this kind of information and that I need to pass along something? I mean, I can't just pick up the phone and call them. So how do I let them know that I'm ready to share something?
All right, so during the pandemic, I don't know about you, but my washing machine has been getting a workout. I have been doing a very good job of using all of the water in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area to wash everything I own continuously. In the 18th century, you are not going to do laundry quite as often as we do, but they definitely have laundry that they have to do. And we don't have dryers in the 18th century. What you're going to do is you're actually going to hang your laundry up and it's going to dry. And so we know that some women, particularly there's a woman, her name is Anna Strong, and she is actually going to be up in New York. And she's doing laundry. And what she would do is she would actually put out certain clothes depending on the message she had. So there was a dead drop, and a dead drop is where you have one person that brings information, leaves it, walks away, and then someone else comes and picks it up. So there's no sort of interaction between the two people and no way of tracing back. So that person might not even know who they're communicating with. Well, Anna is actually going to be hanging her laundry. What she'll do is she'll hang up a black petticoat, and that lets people know that information is ready to be picked up. And there are multiple dead drops. So what she'll do is she'll hang multiple handkerchiefs. So if she hangs one handkerchief, maybe it's in one place. If she hangs two, it's the second dead drop. And if she hangs three, it's in the third. And so what they would do is they would look at that and they would realize that she had a message that was ready to be picked up. Now, we do know that this is happening throughout the colonies, and there's actually a family legend here at the Charlotte Museum of History that actually Mary Alexander, when there was the Battle of Charlotte in 1780 and the British took control of the town, she apparently would hang handkerchiefs in the attic window to let her husband and her sons know that the British were not around and it was safe to return. Now, we don't know whether this is actually true. Unfortunately, it wasn't written down until the 19th century, but we do know that this is happening throughout the colonies, so there is a good chance that something like that happened here.
So a question from one of our participants is, do we have any idea how many spies there were on both the Loyalist and the Patriot side? Do we know how big group this was?
So because it wasn't an officially organized group of people, we don't know the exact numbers. We know that there were a lot of spies, and we know that pretty much everyone could be a spy, and we know that people were delivering information. We know that they were interacting with people, but because it isn't like our CIA today, where you have detailed records or you have an official kind of spy ring, for the most part, we don't know exactly how many there were. We do know that on both sides after the war, people that were writing about it, people who participated in the war, said that spies really were critical to making sure that there was victory for the Americans. And there's a lot of kind of comments about how the British said, well, the Americans just outspied us.
Other than Benjamin Franklin and obviously Nathan Hale, but we assume that soldiers are going to be a part of this, were there any other public figures that we think about that were involved in securing this information, sort of acting as spies and transmitting information between either the European theater and the colonies, or even within the colonies?
We definitely hear about some kind of public figures that are busy transferring information. Of course, we've talked a little bit about Benjamin Franklin, as you mentioned, talked about some of these other diplomats. We've mentioned that Benedict Arnold, who was in this position of power, but we also know that there are a number of people on the ground, and particularly the people on the ground tended to be African Americans, whether they were free or enslaved. And we know that there are a number of people on both who fought for both sides. And before I kind of answer that question, one of the things that always comes up when we talk about why would people who are enslaved want to fight? There's a couple of different reasons for that, but really it is about kind of seizing control of your own destiny. The British are promising freedom to anyone that is willing to fight for them. Unfortunately, we know in the 21st century that they didn't always deliver. A number of enslaved people were actually, after the war, instead of being sent to freedom, were actually enslaved in the Caribbean. They were sold to pay British war debts, and it's definitely a very, very dark part of our history, not only here in America, but also in the Atlantic world in general. But there are some people who get their freedom through that, and in America, the same thing is happening. People on the Patriot side are promising freedom, or people are signing up in hopes of getting their freedom, or in hopes of making it so that if these ideals are brought to light, that they'll be included in the next round of things. So we have a number of enslaved people particularly, and these enslaved people often go into the British encampment, and they will pretend to enlist as soldiers. We see that in a lot of cases. They will enlist to either fight, they will enlist to be basically servants to the officers, and so they're in these very, very public positions, and they are taking this very active role in looking like they are actively working for the British, but they're working as double agents. And some of those people are really going to be the unsung heroes of the American Revolution. And historians have recently been bringing more of their stories to light. We know about James, who I mentioned earlier. James Armistead, we know a lot about him because unfortunately he signs up to fight in the American Revolution on behalf. He gets permission from his master, and he is, after the war, sent back into servitude. And he is petitioning for his freedom, and eventually it's actually, by the time he dies, he's taken a new last name, Lafayette. And that is because General Lafayette heard that he was still enslaved and went, "You have got to be kidding me. This man was a huge influence in making sure that we were successful here." And so he does actually eventually get his freedom and get his pension. But those kind of stories we see, especially for African Americans, are heartbreaking, but also inspiring. It's this sort of resistance and persistence, and they really are these most active figures in making sure that the revolution is successful. I am so sorry, Janet, I can't hear you.
There we go.
We've all done it.
So we just have a few minutes left in our time together, and I had two other questions. One, we've talked about the role of women, and we've talked about the role of Africans and children's. Was there a role for Native Americans in the spy rings as well?
Absolutely. So we know that Native Americans are fighting on both sides of the war. And they're doing so like everyone else because they have their own reasons for wanting to fight for one side or the other. We know in particular the Iroquois Confederacy is definitely on the side of the British because the British have offered to respect more of the treaties. They are offering to kind of protect Iroquois lands. Unfortunately, we know that this doesn't go the way that the Iroquois were promised. We know that the Catawba are fighting on behalf of the Patriots. The Catawba are the group of Native Americans that live in this particular region here in the Carolina backcountry where we are. And you definitely have people that are moving about. You have people that are trading, merchants, and particularly people involved in trade make excellent spies because they're expected to move about. And Native Americans in many cases are the middlemen of trade. In fact, Charlotte itself is where it is. Uptown Charlotte, Trade and Tryon Street. Trade Street is an original Native American trading path. And so you see, especially the Catawba and especially a lot of people in this region being actively involved in that. So we definitely know that Native Americans are sharing information, are actively fighting on behalf of either side, and are doing so because of different ideological reasons.
What should be, as we wrap up today, what should be our big takeaways from this information about spies and traitors, and what can we use to add to our celebration this week of the 4th of July and the Declaration of Independence based on the work of these people?
So for me, when it comes to telling history, one of the things that make museums so important is the fact that we are the carriers of everyone's story, where the place and the space where people are brought to the forefront of these stories of history, because the American Revolution itself has taken on this kind of mythic proportion in American memory. It's this idea of this glorious cause, these ideas of the American Revolution. And one of the things that we're really kind of confronting in 2020 is that this myth of American kind of exceptionalism and this glorious cause didn't necessarily apply to everyone. And a lot of people have been left out of our stories. And especially here in 2020, what we want is we want people to take this moment, take this celebration to celebrate those ideals and celebrate the good, celebrate the things that people had wanted to strive for, and figure out how we here today can actively implement the things that are mentioned. And especially with the study of spies, one of the things that we really see is that anyone can be a spy. It's an opportunity to talk about the people that are so often left out of the narrative, but yet played such an important role in making sure that the American Revolution was successful for the Americans. We see women. Women are taking active steps. They are involved in things. They are making a difference. They are asserting their voices. And you see the same thing with African Americans. You see both enslaved people and free people that are an incredibly important part of this story. And without these individuals, without these traditionally marginalized individuals, this war would not have been successful. It's like I said earlier, the British said the Americans just outspied us. And that's really what it comes down to. These spies are not necessarily people on the battlefield, they're everyday people. And it's this idea that we can all make a difference and we can all have an active role in making sure that the ideals of the American independence are there and realized.
Well, Lauren, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. Appreciate all you've shared with us today. And we look forward to more Lunch and Learns this summer.
Thank you for having me. It was fun to be on this side of the metaphorical table.